We are joined on this episode by a pair of filmmakers whose new film, Alone with You, is available now in select theaters and on digital VOD and pre-order Blu-ray as of February 8th. They are writer-director Justin Brooks and writer-director and star Emily Bennett. Emily, Justin, thank you both so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much
Thanks
for having us.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to get to talk to pairs of filmmakers too, because I'm really looking forward to hearing like each of your input on different aspects of Alone with You, as well as other things about your process.
Yeah, I feel like we're always like cheating because we take one job and we split it between the two of us. But
I mean, it sounds like you're working smart, if anything.
Yeah,
like, here, help me take the load off on this.
But each of you also have like 4 different roles in this film, so I don't think you're doing any cheating.
That's fair. We'll take that.
Yeah, starting off, before we even get into that, we like to usually first ask our guests how they got started in filmmaking. Was there a movie or a show or a relative or friend maybe that helped you get in or gave you the bug? You guys might have taken obviously different paths, but is there a story for either of you?
I mean, honestly, anyone who knows me is like, well, duh, you became a filmmaker, but I didn't see that path that clearly. I mean, growing up in the 90s, you know, great neighborhood, dad's camcorder. I just directed everybody in my block and would like make them do action films and things like that when I was a kid. Then I went to theater school when I was older and got real snobby and did a bunch of Shakespeare. And then eventually found my way back to what I love, which is psychological thriller horror films. So yeah, it's kind of a lifelong process. But
yeah, I say I kind of came to the realization later in life as well. I spent most of my 20s touring around in various punk bands, and it wasn't until later that I realized most of the stuff I did always had to be revolving around horror movies. So like even my band was a horror punk band. The songs we sang were about the movies we enjoyed. Like so eventually I just realized like I just want to tell these stories, and yeah, it's been uphill ever since.
So it sounds like each of you kind of took your own path, but did you have kind of like formalized training or kind of what were your first gigs in the business where you were paid and started learning on the job?
Yeah. So I went to school for music. I moved to Boston and I went to the Berklee College of Music, and then quickly left the Berklee College of Music because I realized you don't need to go to college to play punk rock, and started touring around in a band. And it wasn't until I saw how much heart everybody had in music and in playing that type of music. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't love it like that. I didn't see myself doing that for, into my older years, but I have always loved film. Like that is all I talk about. That's all I surround myself in. And we had actually done a bunch of tours with this Boston hardcore band called Blood for Blood, and their bass player owned a commercial company in Boston. And I honestly, one day just asked him, I was like, anything I can do to just, I'll do for free until I'm good enough at it that you feel like paying me. And he was great, and he let me run around and do stuff on his sets just for little Boston commercials. I, did some stuff for the Celtics and all that stuff. And that's where I really started to learn my way around a set. And I am just, I swallow information. So I dove deep and I started reading everything I could, being on every set I could possibly go on. When I couldn't work on a set, I actually put in to be an extra for multiple films just so I could be around the sets and see how a larger set worked. I have no interest in being an actor, but I had to know how that size of a set worked, So that was just the beginning of it. And I've just continued, I guess, for the most part, very self-taught along the way.
Yeah. And I came at it from the other side of things, came from the cast side. I went to boarding school for acting, trained in theater, mostly kind of method-based Stanislavski, and realized that's not kind of how I wanted to approach acting. I wanted to approach it a bit more from the outside in, a bit more Daniel Day-Lewis or Vivian Leigh, Anthony Hopkins. So I took a big chance and auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and I got in. And that is very rare for an American to do, and I did not take that lightly. It was an incredible 3 years of my life. I trained with Phoebe Waller-Bridge was in my year of Fleabag. She's incredible. And Tom Hiddleston was the year above me. So like I was in some pretty rare air in training. And so, I took on a British accent and, performed in the West End for a while and then graduated school and moved to New York. And, it was the tough off-Broadway world and then indie cinema. And honestly, it took me a long time of auditioning, going from this wonderful school where the Queen of England was my head patron. Like I've met Queen Elizabeth, Her Majesty, and had a conversation with her. And I was just like, what is my life? And then moved to New York and I'm just struggling to pay my bills. And I'm like, when am I going to get work? And I kept auditioning for roles that the dialogue was just so bad. And I was like, God, there's got to be something better than this. And not all projects, but I was like, why don't I try writing something? So I finally started writing my own scripts and ultimately started shooting and just surrounded myself with people who are just so good at their jobs. I moved to Chicago for a bit and found an incredible filmmaking community there. And just really found my people in Chicago, John Klein, Ward Crockett, Darren Callahan, like so many of these wonderful Chicago people who I still hold very close today. And just learned from them and trusted them and learned. And I got my first screenwriting job there as well. I worked with filmmaker Tony Wash out of Chicago. I wrote the pilot for what was going to be a TV show for his Skeletons in the Closet. He has a feature film and we were developing that. So that was my first paid writing job. And yeah, it's like Justin, kind of picking it up along the way.
That's awesome. And you mentioned some names there, and Becky and I would do a whole different podcast with you if Justin wasn't here. But we won't go down the rabbit hole of marking out and asking fan questions about people like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Stick to topic. So have both of you been mostly New York-based workers then in the industry since?
I mean, yeah, I have. I've been on several TV shows like the Chicago shows and then moved back to New York and The Blacklist. I was just on City on a Hill a few episodes. And yeah, I mean, we're New York.
Yeah,
New Yorkers.
I started my TV and film career in Boston and the commercial work. And then once I felt confident in it, pretty quickly headed to New York to continue here. So I've been doing TV and film and video commercial work in New York, I think for about a decade now.
And did you two meet in New York and start collaborating in New York? How did you come together?
Tinder.
I wish it was a way cooler story.
Yeah. We didn't meet on set. We random.
We had our first date at an Alamo Draft House in Brooklyn at the bar attached to the Alamo Draft House, the House of Wax. And we just, I mean, it was immediately movies. Like we just sat and spent, like 3 hours.
Yeah, neither one of us were anticipating the kind of date it turned into, which was just us sitting there nursing like a drink. Like I think I got a Diet Coke and we were just sitting there for hours just talking about like, oh, you made this kind of movie? Oh, well, what do you think of this? And it just became a total geek out. And I left that date and I was just like, that guy's awesome.
So movies still brought you together, even if it was a modern app that everybody meets on nowadays. No shame in that at all. Movies are still what's the tie that binds.
It has been movies since day one. I mean, that's just what we talk about all the time. I mean, it's what we love. So it's what we share as well.
And we come from such different backgrounds, as you've just heard. I mean, it was just so refreshing, honestly, to meet someone like Justin, who's got an encyclopedic knowledge of horror films, who is such a badass. He would just seem so, and with such a kind heart and so much knowledge. It was just thrilling to meet someone like that and to become, life partners. It has been wonderful. We're now engaged. And, but honestly, like the film has always been a part of our DNA from day one.
Sure. Yeah.
And we're going to get to Alone with You soon, but I'm kind of curious, before that, had you co-directed a few shorts together? What was your creative collaboration like before Alone with You?
Yeah, we actually didn't. We did not co-direct any of the shorts. We've made shorts together, but it was usually in the capacity where I shot a short that she directed and wrote, or she would act in a short that I directed and wrote, and so we would kind of ping pong back and forth. And it wasn't until we had done a few of those projects that we had decided to write a feature together. And that was the first time we came together, and it was so fun. It was just so seamless and easy. And like, don't get me wrong, we're both very strong, strong directors in our own right. So we have our opinions, and we would those opinions would clash, but it was never hard to work through it. It was always like in service of the story, and it was just fun to write together. And then that continued. We wanted to keep on working through these stories, and we would come up with stories together that we would not typically write or direct on our own. You know, we both have our solo work. Emily has many scripts out there that are hers alone, and I myself have projects that I want to do as a solo director. But the fun thing is the films we come together on are very different films than what we would do separately. So it's just kind of exciting when we get together to write a story, because it's something so new and something exciting to work together, because we kind of surprise ourselves back and forth. It's really a good time.
So that's a perfect segue into getting with kind of the origins of Alone with You. So obviously this film was shot during the pandemic, and it carries a lot of the themes about isolation from friends and family. The idea of being trapped in your own home is something a lot of us have struggled with over the past couple of years. Was the story originally conceived of prior to the pandemic and then adapted to kind of fit those themes? Or was it more a concept that was purely born out of the practical considerations of how the hell are we going to make a movie during the pandemic?
Kind of both, actually. Yeah. So we shot 2 short films during the 2020 pandemic, one directed by Justin, one directed by me, both of which will hit Alter in February and March, respectively. And after that, we were like, I bet we could shoot a feature. And so we know, as writers, it takes time for an idea to develop. You can't kind of just out of the gate.
Yeah, it doesn't say, now I will have an idea.
Now I'm going to have an idea. Yeah, exactly. And so we would walk in a graveyard in Brooklyn because all of the parks were closed because of COVID. And so a graveyard would be open from like 9 to 5, and we would walk amongst the tombstones, and we would be like, okay, what about this idea? What about this short that you wrote? What about this one that I wrote? What can we develop into a longer story? And we landed on a short script that Justin had written that I was going to produce for him, but it had a male lead, a somewhat similar construction, but the execution was going to be very different. Mm-hmm. And we landed on that, and we were like, let's do that. And we took that idea and changed it entirely, made the main character a girl, Charlie, and then co-wrote Alone with You. We basically outlined the film in May. Our producers, Andrew Corkin and Theo James, gave us notes back and forth, and then we wrote the script in about a month. It came very quickly.
Yeah, it was, once, like, the short film was really just, the outline of the picture. Once we came up with a character of Charlie, she's what drove the film in the direction it went. It's a very different story than the original short, very different character. And that character is what really created the world and created the story that we ultimately came upon. And we didn't know what kind of time frame we were talking with quarantine. And we knew as soon as that was done, we would have to get back to work and figure out life again. And so our idea was, let's try to get this done in this kind of short time span. And so even the script was never a full script. It was actually more of a scriptment. It was a very robust outline. And we knew that whatever kind of actions or things that we would work through on the day, because we were the only ones filming it, we could do that without having to write it down. So we worked as quickly and efficiently as we could while not sacrificing story or quality. just to be able to fit within that time frame that we thought was going to be very short. And ended up, we all got locked in our houses for a lot longer than we thought.
Right. It sounds like the writing process, the isolation helped that along and helped that go a little quicker than it might have normally. But when it comes to shooting, did I hear you right that you said it was just the two of you? Was this like the most bare bones crew? Was it even fewer people than we're imagining?
This is just the two of us on set. There's nobody else.
We are the crew.
Set. We are the crew. Yeah. So we shot, lit, ran sound. I mean, there's literally.
I was the AD. I came up with the shot list every morning.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff you would laugh at how MacGyvered this apartment had become, trying to be able to run sound and camera and lights. And
hanging the boom from the ceiling, as well as lights.
Yeah.
We did move out and we still got our deposit back somehow. So that's pretty incredible. But we are the crew. Justin's father showed up like a couple of times. He drove down from upstate New York to make us dinner because we were living on Kind bars and bananas and stuff.
DiGiorno pizza.
Yeah. And he helped us with a few of the elements, some caustic lighting, some green screen elements. But primarily this was entirely just the two of us.
Yeah, with the exception of, like she said, my father came down, I think, for a total of 4 days and just said, whatever I can carry, hand me. But my father is not a film crew. He doesn't, so he was relegated to, hold this and wave your arms like this. And then
now I will say about his father, he is a retired physician. And so he served as our COVID compliance officer. I negotiated our SAG contracts, and I'm SAG. All of the actors in the film are SAG. And it was very important to us, to not just kind of make this in secret. That's my union. And I wanted to do it right. Now, at the time, there was no vaccine. There were no rules. And so honestly, as we were trying to push this through and get a green light from SAG, I was basically helping them write their how they were going to approach projects.
Yeah, it was really funny. They when we talked to them initially about shooting in the pandemic, they're like, I don't know. Well, let's be safe. So what do you think we should do? And so it was a back and forth with SAG trying to figure out how to navigate COVID well before anybody was navigating COVID on set. I think at the time we were one of only 2 SAG greenlit productions in New York.
Mm-hmm. In the summer of 2020.
Yeah, it was all just new ground and we were all just trying to figure it out. And luckily we were able to do so safely and effectively in the end.
Yeah, and we tested and, SAG's become very well versed in this practice now. And but it definitely, that structure kind of helped us. I find that rules kind of help me creatively. So anything that was put in our way almost helped us become more creative.
For sure. Yeah.
It's all the more impressive knowing that you guys had a literal skeleton crew of the two of you and sometimes Papa. That makes so much of what you pulled off, like I said, all the more impressive. But getting into the movie, nearly 2 years now into this pandemic, and Zoom just became part of millions of people's lives. I know FaceTime was like a prevalent thing before COVID, but video calls now are just so commonplace. And credit to you both for not making those calls in the film feel like a necessity of the pandemic, but rather like a natural way to communicate because you were isolated.
Thank you. Yeah, that was definitely something important to us. I think it's tough to say because we didn't want to be a pandemic movie. We know the way we made this and when we made this was going to be a big part of the story, but we didn't want it to be the story of the film. We didn't want this to be something that if you watch, 10 years down the road, you're going to be like, oh, that was that time. We wanted to create something that felt a little evergreen, something that maybe spoke to, more our personal anxieties than the actual physical horrors that were going outside in the world. So we, of course, had our technical roadblocks having to be, we couldn't have multiple people on set. We couldn't have our actors with us. So we had to find the most natural way to implement that without being, there's already so many great films of that type. I look at Host. Host is such an awesome movie and so brilliantly put together. And we knew that we were going to have to do something different. So it was really about trying to fit those things in a natural world that didn't live in COVID,
Yeah, and I think it definitely, the themes in it are universal, right? It's a slow burn film, has this steadily building sense of dread, as Charlie, the main character, becomes more and more cut off from the world outside her apartment, which is something people can relate to during pandemic times as well as outside of that as well. Another element I think that really puts the viewer on edge is that you eventually come to realize you're dealing with an unreliable narrator. Were there certain films that you kind of pointed to as a reference for the tone or story or like particular filmmakers that inspired your approach?
Absolutely. We love 70s horror. So we took a lot from honestly early Polanski films. The Tenant was a big influence as well. Yeah. A lot of people compare this to Repulsion, but we honestly took more from The Tenant than anything. That's actually where Simone's name comes from. And Don't Look Now, the brilliant film that's edited, just one of the best edited films I've ever seen. Both of those have very subjective journeys. And we wanted to make this, this is not like standard coverage kind of film. This is a very subjective film, a character-driven film. And, it's for every audience member to experience for themselves.
And also, it plays with the sense of time or lack thereof. And just to follow up to something earlier, like, was it a subconscious joke about how we never know what time it is anymore in the pandemic? Or was that like a conscious decision as you were going through it, like the lack of not knowing what the date is? Because I've barely known the date for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I don't know what it is today, honestly.
It's very much a part of the story as well. The idea is the entire story is built to isolate our main character, Charlie. And we wanted to do everything that would separate a person from their day to day. I mean, playing with time was a big part of that. Definitely manipulating the light outside and playing to a degree where she didn't know exactly what time it was. And it's interesting how disorienting that becomes. I mean, all of us lived that life where time stopped really mattering for a good while. And that can disorient you for sure. And that's what we wanted to put our character through.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across very well. I want to go back. You talked a little bit already about your writing process, but I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit more because we've talked with a few co-writers and everyone has a very different process for tackling, the back and forth, passing the baton. Can you talk a little bit more about how you'd work together in terms of drafting? Like, did one person take a lead on certain scenes versus others and, like sharing and giving feedback? Or did you just kind of have a process like, I write this, I drop it off with you, then I pick it up and write until I'm done? How did you do that?
I mean, it's hard. It's funny because we've had to do a lot of pieces written and podcasts about our writing process. And honestly, it's been more challenging to put it into words than to do because it just felt so natural. I think, so basically the answer is I get up super early in the morning. I get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning. I don't need an alarm. I'm one of those weird people. And I always love writing in the morning. I have to do it every single morning or I feel very strange. So I would get up, we would outline first. We would know exactly where the film's going. Mm-hmm. Then just day to day, I would wake up when I would and start writing. And I would know what I'm going to write the night before. So I can sleep, maybe dream about it, which is the best because your dreams can teach you quite a lot about story structure. And I would get up, I would write, and then Justin would get up later in the day. I would hand it over. I'd be like, okay, this is what I tackled here. I couldn't quite get to this place. I don't know why she's doing this here. What do you think about this? We would talk about it. And then Justin would dive in and kind of just pick up the baton there. And, we would circle back whenever we would need to. Luckily, we had our lead actor, me, in the apartment the whole time. So we could audition dialogue. If something didn't sound right coming out of my mouth, like certain things, if it felt stumbling for the wrong reasons, we could rewrite things to kind of suit them to me. But ultimately, it was just a kind of passing back and forth.
Yeah, it was a lot of, I guess we kind of played leapfrog through the scenes. We would go scene by scene. Emily would get up in the morning. She'd write her scene. I would get up far later. And then I'd go back and kind of adjust the stuff I felt I needed to adjust in that scene to then move to the next scene. And then she would do the same with my scene and move on to the next. And then while all that was going on, we would always take our walks in that cemetery, and we'd really talk about what we learned about the character during our scene. And we would share that, and we'd kind of share our discoveries throughout the script so that when we were moving forward, we were always with the same opinion of who this person is and what this person is trying to reach for, so that we never wanted to, write down two different paths. And that's pretty easy to do if you don't communicate while writing together. So yeah, it was just kind of this leapfrog of script writing while meeting in the middle every day and really talking about, what did you learn about Charlie? And here's what I discovered. And I think she'd do this. I agree, but maybe we should try this thing. It's always that kind of back and forth for sure. And it was fun. There was sometimes that's the fun of writing with somebody, is you get those little discoveries. Like Emily would write a scene where all of a sudden Charlie would say something, and that would make her clear a character in my head. I'd be like, oh, that's, I love that. I love that she just said that to her. And I want to, let's play with that. Let's move that forward. I'm like, and then you get to play in your own kind of sandbox for a moment. Like I was the first to get to play with the Thea character. And so I immediately thought to myself, I'm like, well, I want this, we knew who the character had to be. We know, we talked about what type of character this was. So I just went into my bag of people, and I was like, for some reason, I just hear Emily's friend Emma in this part. It's funny. It actually ended up being played by Dora Madison, but Dora's part of Thea is actually based off of the voice of Emma Miles, who plays Simone. If that's not a tongue twister for you.
No, it's funny how that works, how it can be one person in your head all the way up until it just suddenly isn't. It sounds like with the writing process, you guys you have a certain amount that you gel, and it's hard to put into words. As co-directing goes, I know that's still somewhat new for both of you doing that. Is there an advice you'd give other filmmakers? Is there anything beyond just the obvious communication barriers? Like, what would you tell people who are attempting to co-direct maybe that might help them out?
I would say ego is bound to come into it. We're all people. We're all, we're both very stubborn people, both of us, but we're very logical and we serve the story. And honestly, the best advice I could give to anyone who's going into co-directing, make your story your God and serve that God. And if you're fighting for a shot that, might be like a cool shot that you're like, oh, that would be awesome if we could, does it serve the story? That's what we would constantly ask ourselves. Does this serve the story? Yeah. Does it actually serve the story? Does this moment, does this shot? And as long as we had that rule, ego didn't really have a place there, and everything got to be really logical. We were never emotional directing together. We can be stubborn for sure, but it's always in service of the story. And at the end of the day, it's fun. It's like a big logic puzzle that we got to solve together. Yeah,
it's really about always asking the question, why? Why? I think we probably use that word more than any other word on set. Why? And if we did come to an impasse, why is your way right? And if you can't tell why, meaning why did that serve the story? Why does that help tell this story? And if you just wanted to do something because it's a cool thing to do, or like, oh, this is a swish panty, like cool shot, that means nothing. And we luckily we are far enough in our own personal careers that I think Emily and I have gotten a little past being emotional about the choices we make, and are much more practical about what serves the film, what serves the story. And not to say we don't have moments where we're both creatives, we're both passionate about the things we believe in, so that gets into it. But we know that sometimes we need to be like, okay, we're going to table this. We're going to walk away from it. Because I think if we give it 2 hours, we're not going to feel so huffy and puffy about it. We're going to come back and we're going to be able to talk like two practical human beings. And that's usually the case. And it usually, and sometimes those disagreements need a lot more air to just kind of feel themselves out. But usually it's really about, I would say, as far as advice, like really ask yourself why you want to do something, because it's cool is not a good enough answer. Like that will not create a lasting story. And that everything, as she said, story is God. Like that needs to be where everything is heading. So always ask yourself why, and try not to be emotional in your decisions, but practical to that story.
No, good notes for sure. And also, my favorite suggestion yet is that, guys, if you have writer's block out there, walk around a cemetery. I just feel like that will cure all ills.
It's really good for writer's block.
It's great.
Speaking of walking around cemeteries, Becky and I have mentioned this before. We don't think there's nearly enough urban horror. Like you can count on your hand off the top of your head. A recent example maybe being Daniel Is It Real? But movies in New York, especially like urban horror in that regard. This film could in theory take place anywhere, but like when you have it in New York, it's almost impossible for New York City not to kind of feel like another character in a movie. And you guys just doing establishing shots that I'm not going to give away was enough of like a production value bump to obviously help the cause. It's one of those places though where you can be surrounded by people but feel incredibly alone. And I don't know if like was living and shooting in New York City, did that impact the story or the process at all?
Yeah.
I mean, psychologically, yeah, for sure. It was such a strange place to be during the pandemic because we all went into lockdown in our own ways, but doing so in New York City was so strange because we were just all in our little boxes, like around and on top of each other. And yet we were not allowed to be anywhere near each other. So it was very isolating and yet kind of suffocating. And I'm so glad, honestly, we got that. I think of 28 Days Later, getting some establishing shots of the city, because honestly, we would have never been able to grab some of the shots that we got if it were in any other time. New York City is just packed all the time, especially outside now, now that people are kind of out and about, even now with Omicron and like things kind of not sure if we're going back out, but people are outside in New York, they're wearing masks, but they're walking around. We were shooting in a time when people were afraid of even doing that.
Yeah, it's an interesting time where you could hear the world outside. You could smell that there's, the world was there, but it wasn't, and
but we
it
couldn't touch it.
Yeah, it was always just outside your door. And that's something we definitely wanted to bring in. And I think even in its sound design, we wanted to show a world that could possibly be outside, but something that Charlie never gets to touch or be involved in once she's locked away. And that's definitely something I think, psychologically we all felt in the city. I mean, we have people move to New York because there's stuff to do. We live in these little apartments because we don't spend that much time in them. There's a whole world outside our door worth spending time in. And this was this time where that world was still there. We knew it was logically, but we weren't allowed to interact with it. And we certainly couldn't be a part of it. And that kind of became Charlie's world when we locked her away. And it's funny, when I always spoke to our amazing sound designer, Sean Duffy.
We love you, Sean.
His work is so brilliant, but I kept on referring to the apartment as a submarine. Mm-hmm. I was like, I love the idea that we can hear the ocean sounds around her. We can hear these noises, but you can't interact with it. You're locked in this tube. And I think like the work he did is so brilliant, and it just blew me away when we got to listen to it. But that was all based very much on that idea of a world just out of reach.
Oh yeah, the sound is fantastic, and it's at times like almost grating and aggravates you, just like Charlie, where you're like, oh my gosh, make it stop. I'm referring to one thing in particular that I don't want to spoil, but I'm glad you called out the sound, because agreed, I think it really heightens the tension of the film and helps communicate those feelings of everything being just out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and Emily and I talk about this. I think horror is very much akin to like black box theater. It's so much of what makes the world and makes a film horrific is in its sound design and what it allows the audience to lean in and create themselves. I mean, we always say show the monster as little as possible because what people create in their heads is always going to be far scarier. And so much of that is done through its sound design. And so much of our world, really, the world of Alone with You for us as directors came to life when Sean Duffy sent us that first mix of the sound design. It really came together. And all of a sudden, all these conversations we were having, all this stuff that we had, and we talked to Sean about, we didn't say, I want a ding here and a tick there and a zoop here. We talked to him about the story. We talked to him about the state of minds that our characters were in. We talked all about the feeling of this film. And he's the artist that walked away with that and turned that into a practicality and into that sound design. And it's just wonderful. I'll work with Sean every chance I can possibly get. He's phenomenal.
Same.
Okay, so pivoting for a second, we can't go without mentioning Barbara Crampton because this is a genre-loving podcast and you're both horror fans, so all hail Barbara Crampton.
Yeah.
How was she cast in the role? And like, did you have a chance to work with her in person or was it all done remotely?
Yeah, so we have a casting director, our casting director, David. We had spoken to him about casting the roles of Thea and the mother, and he gave us several different tapes for Thea, which we reviewed. Dora Madison really just shown she was clearly was our Thea. And then he just came to us and he was like, well, for the mom, what do you guys think of Barbara Crampton? Like, what would you think if we cast her? And we were like, yeah, sure. That sounds great, David.
Yeah, like, go make that happen.
Yeah. But honestly, we were just like, I mean, of course, feel free to share the script.
There's no way she'll ever want to be part of a movie this small.
And then he circled back like a day or two later and he was like, well, she read it and she really wants to talk to you. And we were like, phenomenal. Great. So we were just so thrilled to hop on a Zoom call with her. Is the first time that we met her. And we just talked about the story and she really responded to the first scene with Charlie and the mother, how we did not write that character to be cliche or stereotypical. She was nuanced. She had a point of view. She may be right. She may be wrong, but she is a person. And she really responded to that because she's an actor and she wants to play someone who is a real person. So she was wonderful. She signed on pretty immediately after we talked to her and we rehearsed with her. We never met in person. We sent her a GoPro camera, all of the equipment. She did her hair and makeup. We did wardrobe tests with her to be like, okay, this one, I think this pops your eyes. That's the cross necklace you should wear. This is where we're setting it. And then on the day I was on Zoom with her, we recorded her coverage separate from mine. I was performing with her, but my performance is not in the film. On that day, we were just getting her performance. So I was performing with her as a good scene partner, giving her material to react to. And then later we captured my coverage after we had chosen her take. So it was a very interesting way of working. But honestly, Barbara grounds that performance so well and fleshes that character out and ultimately gives Charlie a history that just wouldn't be there in the film if we didn't have Barbara Crampton.
Yeah, and Barbara's one of those actors that is she's so giving and so there for the project. It was a big enough ask for such a little production to ask such a horror icon, will you come play with us? But she also, like Emily said, like she was her own DP. She ran her own camera. She ran her own sound. She did her makeup and lighting and all through us working with her and instructing through Zoom. But she was just so game. She was just there to do the work. And she's such an amazingly grounded actor. She brought so much to the role. She had something to say about that character. She brought up, like, we really talked about who that was. And it's the film is better for it. It's really, Barbara is somebody that we'll work with as many times as we have the opportunity to. She's absolutely brilliant.
Right. And kudos to her for being such a trooper with the tech side of it, if nothing else.
She really is she's such a, she lifts up independent film so often. I mean, if you look at her career, it's just so many first-time filmmakers or indie filmmakers that she's put, she's stood behind, and we're so blessed to be one of them, for sure.
Yeah, I've heard that story from a lot of filmmakers about her, how I don't know if there's a film that's necessarily too small or a filmmaker too unheard of. I think she's someone that, she connects with the story.
Yeah.
She'll give it a shot, and that's amazing. So maybe other than getting Barbara Crampton in this movie, was there anything else that really surprised you, or were there any unexpected challenges that you had not contemplated before heading into your first feature?
Oh, everything.
Like,
right?
all of them. Yeah. I mean, this was not supposed to be our first feature. Our first feature was basically financed right before the pandemic hit. And then, everything kind of fell apart as they did. We are not alone in that experience. We know tons of filmmakers who had the same experience. That film will still get made. Will not star me. I will be solidly behind the camera. I may make a cameo, but every challenge in Alone with You was a surprise. I don't think we, having a crew of 2 people with me playing the lead character, that's unheard of. I mean, frankly, I've never heard of a film doing that. And we went into it with this confidence after making 2 short films together successfully. And honestly, once we started shooting, we really realized what we had gotten ourselves into. And honestly, but once we hit our stride, it was an endurance test. It was a marathon. Sure. We started July 1st and shot through August with 2 days off. This was life. This became life, but it became a kind of structure. Honestly, you know what it reminds me of? In Old Boy, when he's locked in that room.
And when he starts to become comfortable with just being there.
Yeah. And he goes crazy. They still feed him. He's like ranting and raving. And then slowly but surely, he makes the ticks on the wall. He starts doing the push-ups. He starts having a regimen. He starts having a structure. That's basically what we did. We were locked inside, and we became him later in his
Our first day was hell. It was awful. I mean, the first real day of shooting, we wanted to just sit on our couch and cry. It was awful. And I think the thing that makes it all different was, of course, we've done shorts on our own. We've shot our own stuff. We've been, single and dual people crew plenty of times. But all of a sudden, there were stakes. There were other people involved in this. There was a budget. We had producers. There was a budget. There were producers. There were people that were waiting in the wings to be a part of this. I mean, we had actors attached, and we knew we can't just, after our first day, we can't say, oh, you know what, never mind, that's too hard. Next thing, that it was tough. So we had to shovel through those first few days that were terrifying and tough. And we were learning a whole new way to make things. And like Emily said, I think once we became more comfortable with the new regiment, like that's when we started finding a rhythm and realizing, okay, this is how we just need to pivot this way. And we need to we're going to be making something in a different way than we're used to, but we can still do this. And luckily, I mean, where we didn't have crew, we did have time. And that's what we took to be able to make sure that we didn't want people to see, like, it's inevitable we're an independent film. We look like an independent film. There's not millions of dollars behind this. But we wanted to mitigate that as much as possible. We want to allow an audience to get lost in the story without thinking of the nuts and bolts of how something was made. So that was really in allowing us the time to be able to put this film together, really.
Again, knowing what we know from you, and we appreciate all these answers and your candidness about how you did it all. I think you guys achieved it greatly, all things considered. My producer, Hat Brain, is just like jealous of how much money you guys saved on meals and crew. But yeah, again, Alone with You, available now in select theaters. It's on digital VOD and available for pre-order on DVD, Blu-ray. And in an old boy vein, we're going to trap them here just a little bit longer. So stay tuned for the back half here where we give them a round of rapid fire 15.
Yeah.
So now we are moving to the rapid fire 15, which is always very rapid and very fire,
Yes.
where we're going to ask you some fun, kind of like inside the actor's studio sort of questions to get to know. And if you want to pick one of you to answer first, or just shout it out if you want. Sometimes it's easier if you assign one person and then pass if you're not ready to answer. But no pressure, not a cool test, just something to...
We'll do Emily and then I'll go.
All right, sounds good.
Starting off, what movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Scream, for sure.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, I don't think I've ever heard either one of those answers on this so far.
Really?
That makes me happy.
Everybody
Scream may be
needs
one of
Scream.
mine as well.
Oh, good. Oh, it's so good. I
You may
rewatched
know the
it.
answer to the next one for Emily.
Oh, go for it.
What is your favorite horror movie franchise?
Oh, that's interesting. Is it? Yeah, I'd say Scream. I think Scream. I think they did a great job with the new one too. And I genuinely can't wait to see what they do with the next one. I hope there's a next one. So yeah, Scream. I'm a 90s kid, so.
Mine's Hellraiser. Yeah, even the straight direct to video. I just love that world and I want to see more in it. And I can't wait to see what's coming next for sure. I love Clive Barker. Obviously,
I love these answers because Scream is often considered like one of the most consistent franchises, and that like all the movies at least have a certain quality. I've never heard anyone say that about that.
That's the first Hellraiser answer we've ever gotten because of exactly what you said.
Funny.
I mean, that's my second,
I would want people to go back and really pay attention to some of the smaller Hellraiser. I mean,
we've been watching
the director of Sinister did a Hellraiser movie, and I don't think anybody like even realize that there's a lot of good stuff in there for sure.
And it has one of my favorite subtitles of a film ever, Hellraiser Deader.
Yeah, Deader. Yeah. I love Hellraiser Inferno. And for God's sake, I mean, they went to space by the fourth movie.
We just rewatched that one, by the way. That one's not that bad.
Really
and it's
isn't.
not Adam Scott in a wig in the 1700s. I mean, what more do you
That
want?
was him.
Yes,
That
Oh
was
my
him.
God.
Oh, yeah. Before he met Leslie Knope and,
That's right.
rode off into the sunset.
In a similar vein, what is your favorite horror movie subgenre?
Ooh, subgenre. I answered this recently, actually. I think a good, and it kind of spans genres, but I love a good haunted house movie, whether it's like sci-fi haunted or poltergeist haunted or Haunting of Hill House. Even You're Next, I think is kind of in the same. I love when a filmmaker takes a house and just wreaks havoc in it in some way or another.
Yeah, and I would go a sci-fi horror for sure. I mean, I think some of my favorite things are, I just love when I love a world building. And I mean, Alien is always in one of my top favorite horror movies of all time. And I love, there's so many, Event Horizon is so brilliant. I love the Cube series. So yeah.
All good ones. All right. So going classic now, what is your favorite Universal monster or Universal monster movie?
Dracula. Yeah.
Mine's definitely The Creature. I love The Creature. Yeah, Creature from the Black Lagoon for sure.
You're a proper Guillermo.
I love that. That creature is one of the coolest designs ever. I remember as a kid, all I wanted when I went to Universal Studios for the first time, I just thought it was going to be a horror playground because that's the only thing I knew about Universal was the monsters. And all I wanted was a little figure of the creature from the Black Lagoon. And that's when I realized Universal Studios makes a hell of a lot more movies than just monster movies. And you couldn't find it anywhere. Like they have one little thing in the corner that's like the Monsters show. That bummed me out.
As someone who worked there once, he is correct. But I will say the Florida park is building like an edition called the Dark Universe that I believe has some type of bend toward the Universal Monster stuff. And I think there's supposed to be some more featured stuff there. So
that sounds awesome.
I don't know more, I'd tell you. Someone who's dabbled in and around horror before, what is each of yours favorite David Lynch movie?
Justin is laughing so hard right now. Honestly, I'm a massive David Lynch fan. So I go between Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. I think all time Mulholland Drive, it's just so wonderful. Lost Highway is a very close second. What about you, Justin?
Oh man. Jesus. Eraserhead, easy. Eraserhead for sure. I am not the biggest David Lynch fan. I know it's blasphemy, but
It's okay. Neither am I.
He's not everybody's cup of tea.
It's so funny that it's like, that's why we laugh. Cause it's funny because this shows you our difference. Emily loves David Lynch. I am not the biggest fan, but I do like Eraserhead. I really enjoy that movie. I think that's great.
But I do love David Lynch with my eyes wide open. Like I've seen all of his shorts. I've seen his Eraserhead. I've seen Twin Peaks. I've like Fire Walk with Me is such an odd, funny, horrible movie, like just horrifying in its execution. I just love how he just makes his own shit, man. Like he's honestly not that complicated of a human being. Like if he sits down, he's like a grandpa, you know, he just has
his cigarettes and
he just takes his pictures and, you know, he's tells you the weather on a YouTube channel every now and then. And he's just
he like whittles too, right? He's a whittler.
He's just a lovely weirdo. And I adore the man. And I just love his point of view. I love a filmmaker with a clear point of view.
Actually, I do like Elephant Man as well. That's a great film. I love Elephant Man.
People forget he did that one.
I do really like, I would say early Lynch is definitely where I lean for sure.
There is something to say about people that are just fully themselves and it's represented in their work. You gotta love it.
Sure.
Okay, so a very different type of filmmaker now. What is your favorite Steven Spielberg movie?
Oh, everything.
Well, you go for it.
Oh, Mike, no, that's not fair. My favorite, Jesus. You know what? No, that's easy. Jurassic Park. Yeah. I'm of that generation. When I saw Jurassic Park, it was fucking magic. It was just I just saw dinosaurs in a film and it looks so good. And I mean, Stan Winston is a personal hero. I dabbled in effects for years when I was a kid and his work on that film is just unbelievable. And it gives me goosebumps. It's just, that is magic in cinema. So I mean, it's hard. Spielberg's one of my absolute favorite filmmakers, but I think Jurassic Park really, just wowed me as a kid for sure.
I fully agree with that. I watched that when I was a kid and immediately fell in love with Jeff Goldblum, of course, like we all did. But honestly, I would act that out when I was a kid, like the moment where they take off their glasses and they stand up in the Jeep and they're like, welcome to Jurassic Park. And then later, actually, Richard Attenborough became the president of the school I went to. And I actually got to hang out with, with him from childhood. So that was so incredible. And it's just so quotable and so thrilling. We watched it like only a couple of years ago.
It's also, it's still so good.
It stands up. Like everything it holds up. It's just such a great movie.
And you both hinted at them possibly being favorites, but the next question is, who would you say is your all-time favorite director?
Oh man, all time? Stanley Kubrick.
Whew. I mean, Spielberg is super close. I would say, I would have to go Ridley Scott. I think, the worlds that man has created is just, I love Ridley Scott's filmmaking for sure.
All good choices. All right. So this question is for Justin. So you have a number of tattoos that we've seen from the pictures. Do you have a favorite one or one that you have a good story you'd like to share about?
Do I have a favorite? I think one of my favorite tattoos is one that people don't generally see because it's on my chest. And it's something that is a little alarming when I was younger and trying to date. But I have the original cover of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the clown skull with a corncob pipe. I have that tattooed on my chest. Very large tattoo of that on my chest, which is, that's one of my favorites. And it was actually one of my first tattoos. And I can tell you a chest tattoo for one of your first is don't do that. It's not a good idea. That thing hurt like a son of a bitch. But still one of my absolute favorites because it's amazing. It's representative of the first thing that I remember that scared me.
And scared away potential dates, it sounds like.
Oh, all the time.
Well, attracted me because it was actually a picture. He had a shirtless picture on his profile
Because I'm one of those guys.
I mean, it was very tasteful, but I will say I saw that tattoo and I was like, I want to date this guy. I want to go on at least a date with this guy because that tattoo is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Well, it hooked the good one, then, so that worked out.
Oh,
Worked out. Now, in a question for Emily, since we've learned that you lived in London for a stint, what was your favorite thing about living in jolly old England? Or maybe what was the thing you maybe miss most about your time in London?
Marmite.
I mean, I eat Marmite all the time anyway. I loved living over there. My favorite thing, I mean, it's kind of twofold. It's the West End. It's the theater that exists there. It's the Globe. It's the National. It's the Old Vic. It's just the constant overflowing talent in acting and technique. I mean, it's where Shakespeare worked, and he's just a god to me. I read all of his plays when I was very young, and that was a badge of honor for forever. I'm such a geek for that. So standing on the grounds of like Stratford upon Avon, being close enough to that sacred ground on the train, and then being at the Globe in London, that was the greatest. But I will say I did love going to the Tate and going up to the top, and they have this wonderful restaurant at the top of the Tate, and you can sit in the window and have tea and just overlook the city. And it was just one of my favorite things to do, even alone, like on a lonely London day. And of course it would be raining, but I could just kind of get tea and a biscuit and look down on the city. And it was kind of transcendent. It was a very romantic time in my life. So I very much miss London.
So back to a question for both of you. Since you've both been New Yorkers long enough to ask, what is your favorite restaurant? Or maybe what is a place, like if one person's in town just for a night, where would you take them out to eat?
Momofuku Noodle Bar.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely my favorite.
I like how there was no hesitation there. Like, I know.
No, it's the best ramen. You got shrimp buns that are like light as air, like on clouds, and like the desserts, like, oh my God, it's just the greatest.
I would go Radagast. It's a big old beer garden in Brooklyn, and it's like a proper beer garden. I love that place. And they have a big fire pit in the back where they do bratwursts and various sausages I love German food. So that's Radagast was my joint.
Both really good names, Momofuku and Radagast.
Yeah.
Right. Both could be characters in Tolkien. We don't know.
Absolutely.
What would be each of your walk-up music? Say you were coming out for a TED Talk or coming out to present the movie, or maybe you were coming out to a box at Fantastic Feud. What are you guys coming out to?
Closer by 9 Inch Nails.
Definitely Wake Me Up Before You Go. That song is in my
There you go. Throw them off with the
The contrast there is beautiful.
For sure.
Well, see, that's the funny thing about the two of us too, because you'd look at Justin and you'd be like, he's really dark and she's pretty normal. And like, I go so dark, and he's actually like the most optimistic of the two of us. So that actually makes a lot of sense that we answered that way.
George Michael's, I love him.
He made great pop music. There's no arguments here.
Good.
Father Figure, that whole album is fantastic.
Am is fucking amazing. I'm for it.
Yeah.
I know that's not fitting of a tattooed horror dude, but
man, you do you.
I love it. I
We
love to
contain
dance.
multitudes. Come on.
I love to dance.
All right. In a similar vein, what is your go-to karaoke song? Even if you don't normally do karaoke, if you had to get up on stage and perform, or you were, coerced into doing some drunken karaoke, what would you be singing for us?
Oh my God. Karaoke terrifies me. And yes, I'm saying that as someone who has performed in musicals professionally and on stage. Karaoke terrifies me. But I'd go back to, what I sang as a child, and I would go A Whole New World.
Yeah.
Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
Or no. Sorry. Part of Your
right?
World.
Part of Your World, Little
okay.
Mermaid. Whole New World, Aladdin.
Whole New World's a different film.
No, that's right. That's Aladdin. Sorry. Yeah. I would go Ariel. I want to be where the people are. I would do that and just do it big.
Typical redhead stuff.
Yeah, whatever. There aren't a lot of us.
I think every time I've ended up at a karaoke bar, I've always ended up doing What Goes Around Comes Around by Justin Timberlake. I don't know. I love JT, man. Yeah.
I think something we all can take
a
multitudes.
Punk song or something, given your history.
No, man, I spent my 20s having to play punk rock 24/7. I'm all about top 40.
Well, and in karaoke, it's also like, what do people want to hear, around you? And it's about getting the crowd into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't have to sing alone.
I want it that way. That's a good go-to.
Oh, that's true.
I really like Hang Tough and New Kids on the Block. Yeah.
You're a crowd pleaser,
Just
man.
some fun stuff.
We need to get you to a karaoke bar.
And
we're going to have to find him at Fantastic next year, and we'll have a list ready.
Throw some Danzig in there. Maybe.
Right.
Hit some, Mother or something like Astro Zombies. I like Astro Zombies.
And Sean, I like the way you think. This Fantastic Fest, Justin Brooks, live in person.
Singing all your favorite boy band hits by the breakout star of said boy band. So have a Robbie Williams tune in there, a Timberlake tune.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
So choose your dream home: remote mountain cabin with home theater and a hot tub, or urban penthouse with downstairs Michelin star restaurant. Choose between those and explain. Show your work.
Wait, so sorry, say those again.
So a remote mountain cabin with a home theater inside and a hot tub, or an urban penthouse suite with a downstairs Michelin star restaurant.
Oh, definitely the first one.
Cabin.
Well, because we've always we've actually talked about our dream home before, while living in an apartment where we were shooting a movie where we wanted to just go insane. And we were like, where would we actually want to live after this? And we came up with this idea. It's a mix. It's called our Ex Machina Forest Witch House.
Yeah.
The house in Ex Machina.
I want to know more about this.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, we knew all those words in succession.
But I do know the house, yes.
So his, Oscar Isaac's beautiful home in Ex Machina, but
co-designed by a forest witch.
Yes.
That is our favorite type of home. If a forest witch helped design the Ex Machina house.
That's right. So industrial, lots of glass, lots of Scandinavian, maybe German brutalist infrastructure, but covered with gnarled branches that were probably haunted.
Yeah.
And then definitely a home theater and a hot tub in the back.
I'm so glad I put that question down. It was a weird question, but we just got the best answer in the world.
Hey, man, we've talked about that.
The minute you ask that question, I'm like, we know this answer.
I have a random follow-up. Do you want Oscar Isaac in the house or an Alicia Vikander robot?
Ooh, I go Oscar Isaac.
You have to choose.
Would you?
Yeah, he dances, man.
I mean,
if
he
dance with Oscar Isaac.
Honestly, if he would just show up and teach us that disco dance, I'm all about, that would be fun.
Yeah.
My instinct was a robot, but then I remember spoiler, Windows passed, she trapped forever in there. So yeah, Oscar Isaac's the right pick.
Also, I don't know.
She would fool all of us and then we would die.
I'd also feel creepy being like, I want the girl robot.
I know. I'll be like,
moving on to maybe a less awkward strain of conversation. So Alone With You played at a number of cool genre fests. Do you have a personal favorite film festival? It doesn't have to be from the Alone With You run, but just in general, maybe a favorite festival experience.
I mean, honestly, I had my short film lovers tour in 2019, and Sitges is just so incredible. And Justin sadly couldn't be there because he was shooting in Africa at the time. But Sitges is unbelievable. Just the people, the location, it doesn't feel real. It was just such a joy to be there. And then on the Alone With You tour, Fantastic Fest is incredible. Oh my God, I cannot wait to go back.
And we made so many good friends.
Many good friends. But I have to say, a special place in my heart, and for you, Becky, Denver, I have to shout out Telluride Horror Show, because man, those guys are doing it they are doing it right.
Same.
That place is just so welcoming and fun, and it's not a town that we would have ever gone to otherwise. That was just such a wonderful personal experience.
Yeah, I think I love Fantastic Fest. Fantastic is, it was such an honor to be part of that film festival, but Agreed. I think what was fun about Telluride is it felt like such a destination festival. Like it's in this little pocket of mountains. It's
like a
this
secret.
it was really fun in that we would just spend the day in that little town and you would pass the people that just went to your movie and you'd get to hear about it right there on the street and talk to other horror fans. And then you'd talk to them about the movie you just saw. And yeah, it feels super intimate, but it's still like, it's big. It's a big festival. There's some great films there, but you just feel really, mixed in, like we got to hang out with some filmmakers that we have enjoyed for years, and we got to hang out and make friends with new fans that enjoyed our film. And we're new. We're indie filmmakers. Yeah. We're pretty new on the scene. We've been around for a while, but this is our first feature and we felt important. It was nice to feel really part of things. And Ted he's running it right there. So love that festival.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the least pretentious film festivals I've been to, where there's a lot of them that are more like critics and focused around the critics, whereas Telluride's all about the fans, all about the filmmakers.
Sure. Yeah, if you're a fan of horror, like if you're a fan of genre cinema, go to Telluride. That's just because they celebrate you there. It's wonderful.
Agreed. And finally, rounding out this 15-question questionnaire, what would be your dream project to work on? And if, in Emily's case, if it's an acting gig as well, but as far as like a genre, a period, a style of movie that you guys would love to tackle as directing, as writing, as acting goes?
Oh God, you go first.
I'm so in love with the first script Emily and I wrote together, Kept, and I really want to make that film. I'm excited by that film. I think I'm just excited by that script. I've been for a long time, and I'm excited to make that down the road when we have the first opportunity. It's now been, God, how many years since we wrote that script? 3 years? 3. Yeah. And that's one that I'm super excited about for sure.
And then dream project. I mean, I think
and then a Hellraiser movie.
I hope the film Justin just talked about, I think that's very doable. That film will get made for sure. God, pie in the sky. Like, what do I want to do?
Live action Little Mermaid.
I'm playing Ariel. No, I would not want to do that. And they're already doing that. Oh my God. I would do, honestly, I'm such a Shakespeare nut. And I know they just remade Macbeth, which is wonderful. Honestly, my first script was kind of a take on Macbeth. My dream project would be to somehow, and I'm not sure what it would be yet, but to take a Shakespeare, one of the more horrific Shakespeares, be it Julie Taymor did Titus so brilliantly. So probably not Titus, but maybe Richard II has a bunch of Cymbeline is an incredibly not well-known play, but it's so awful. It's so bloody and horrifying. I would adapt one of those brilliant plays into the modern day with a big budget. And I would want to do that right. Yeah, that's what I would want to do.
My dream project is my next one.
Right.
Whatever
the next
that
one
is.
Oh, sure.
Whatever the next one is.
Whatever gets you paid and keeps you creative.
I just want to keep getting to do this.
Yes.
Amen. Yes.
All right. Well, we appreciate those answers for sure. And that was the end of that. You guys passed with flying colors. Not that there was a grade, but.
Yay.
Earlier,
I think Emily had alluded to a future project. Is there anything else you guys have on the horizon you can vaguely talk about, or anything to promote outside of Alone with You?
Yeah, I mean, we have, like we spoke about Kept, that's a film that we're excited and is finished and ready to go. We just need to figure out the last bits of that. But we both have stuff separately, as well as working on 2 other fun ideas together. Emily already has, I think, the count is up to 30,000, 40,000 scripts finished and ready to make. She's such a prolific writer.
Yeah, we have our projects together for sure. I am nearing a really good stage of financing with my first solo feature. I can't really talk about that right now, but
it's awesome, and I'm excited.
Oh, thank you. It's a project that I was hired to kind of rewrite and direct, and so Justin will shoot that with me, and that'll be my first solo directing project. Hopefully, shooting later this fall. And then I've, been fortunate to be cast in a couple of really incredible independent genre films this year. So I will act in 2 horror/genre films this year, neither of which I can really talk about at the moment. One's a smaller role, and the other is a leading role. And I have to learn some new skills for that one. So I have to learn how to ride a dirt bike and get real good at it. So that'll be really interesting. And then, and hopefully Alone with You brings more opportunities that we have to kind of figure out how to work into our schedule. So,
yeah.
That's awesome. Sounds like there's a lot coming up. If people want to kind of follow you online to, stay up to date with, the projects, when you can talk more about them, where would you like people to follow you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Twitter, Emily R. Bennett, 2 N's, 2 T's. And my website is www.emilyreneebennett.com.
And I'm on Instagram and Twitter as jbrooksfilm. And then my website is jbrooksfilm.com.
Awesome. We'll be sure to also add those into the paperstreetpodcast.com episode page so you guys can find those in the show notes.
Yay.
And again, Alone with You, out now. Find it to rent or buy on VOD, on digital. The DVD, Blu-rays available for pre-order now as well. And it's also in select theaters, so check it out there if you can find it in and around your neighborhood. Emily, Justin, thank you both so much for the time. Thank you for the answers. We were happy to talk about Alone with You. We're hoping some folks go out and give it a chance, and especially after hearing how you guys went about it and the kind of DIY spirit of this show and what we always talk about with indie filmmakers. Like, you guys really exemplify that. It's very cool that you guys were able to pull off what you pulled off on such a minimal crew, if nothing else.
Well,
thank you so much. I just hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, anytime you want to talk about horror movies.
That's all the time.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure.
Thanks again for the time.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.